my domain is narratives, okay? I'm going to tell you a story, okay? I mean, I like to be this kind of storytellers. You may believe me or not, that you may be convinced it's my own story, okay? It's not only mine, but that's me, and also it's important. What I'm going to tell you, it has to be filtered through who I am when I'm telling you these things. I mean, I'm not representing the entire of humanity, I'm just, and she is my mother, okay? She's a commoner. I'm the son of a commoner. My father used to be a commoner as well. My mother is living in Galicia, in the northwest coast of Spain, and she's collecting clams to prepare this dish, okay? And again, she's my mother at the bottom. And clams is a wonderful example of the idea of food as a commons, because clams are produced by nature, and my mother, that it's a kind of illegal collector of clams, because she doesn't have that's a reality, because she doesn't have an official fishing certificate, because my mother, even she's living in front of that beach, she goes there, collect the clams, and basically prepares this nice dish, almejas a la marinera, whenever I'm going there. So my mother, let's say, waits for me with the clams that she collected herself. Now, how it's going to be today? I mean, I'm very fond of what is called a Socratic method. It means that I'm not going to deliver a lecture or a speech, or I want to, let's say, dialogue with you. I want to have an interaction, and then I will try to guide you, like Socrates was doing with his pupils, basically to try to reach a final point where we can have a common understanding on what I want to share with you. So please follow me, okay? So what do you think about that? And again, it's not going to be, I mean, I want you to react, otherwise it's going to be very boring. So what do you think about that? In favor. Okay, but please go quickly. So reactions, a few sentences. Yes. It's a good thing, it's a bad thing. Do you like it? Do you support it?
Inclusive.
Fine. Free education for all, because I mean, it's not. You don't pay for that.
If we said education for all, that would.
It could also be good education for all. No, it's fine. No, fine. Everything is part of the game. Again, I mean, so it's is anybody against?
Well, who pays?
Okay, that's a very good point. Who pays? Well.
What kind of education?
Okay, fine. What kind of education? But that's a next step. But in principle, the idea that everybody should have free access to education, whatever type of education it may be, it's fine? It's fine for you? Yes. Is there anybody against? Well, you're not Chileans or US citizens, or, because those are, I mean, there are some countries where education is not free. What does it mean free, okay? It means, because any educational, let's say the educational system in our countries, in Europe, for instance, we are all used to be living in countries where we have everybody's entitled between 5 and 16 or 5 and 18. Every child is entitled to get access to a seat and a chair and a table in a school, okay? You can choose private schools, you can choose boarding schools, you can choose public schools, but if you are between 5 and 16, the state, through different means, will guarantee you that you have access to good education. With good teachers and with good schools, the teachers, at the end of the month, they get a salary, okay? And the schools, somebody built the schools. So free, it means that somebody paid with their taxes. Fine. And that's what happens. I mean, there are 4 examples. I mean, Ireland, Singapore, Australia, Finland. It's basically meant to guarantee that everybody get access to a minimum amount of education, good quality in good schools. Free health for all. Is anybody against this idea? Well, there is, at global level, of course, you know that the WHO is basically leading an initiative for universal health coverage, what means that everybody in the world should have access to a minimum level of health services without undermining their purchasing power. Okay? It doesn't mean that it has to be free. I mean, in Spain, if you have a heart attack and on the streets, there will be an ambulance that will take you to the hospital and you will be treated. In Belgium, it may be the same case, but then you have to pay some things in advance, and then, or in France, and then you pay in advance, and then the state returns you back, okay? And depending on your income level, you will be returned 100%, 95%, 80%. So there are different means. And in all our European countries, assuming that you are, well, none of you are European, but I mean, in the European countries, and many parts of the Western world, as you can see there is a universal health coverage that assures you or guarantees you that, I mean, at least basic health services will be covered by the state. And remember, the ambulance drivers, the nurses, the doctors, the cleaners, and the suppliers, everybody gets paid at the end of the month, okay? So when we think about free things, it doesn't mean that everybody works for free. And we understand that. Why you are murmuring? I mean, so what do you think about this? No, please. I mean, don't be shy. I mean, now before it was easy because we are used to be living in societies, in countries where we have already guaranteed access to education and health. But what about this? Please, no. Yeah, well, fine. That's very positive since the very beginning.
Case by case.
What does it mean, case by case?
I think that the first group to like give free food for is like the most food insecure that don't have the means to feed themselves.
Okay, well, that could be targeting universal food access, fine. But do you think that that's a good sentence? It's good or bad per se? I mean, think about Aristotle, okay? The idea of, things are good or bad by nature. And so free food for all is a good or a bad thing? You can say bad, okay? That's where the conversation starts being interesting. When
Good luck with this.
Sorry?
It should come before education, shouldn't it?
Wonderful, you read my mind. Are you familiar with Maslow's pyramid? Yeah, where is food in this Maslow's pyramid? Over there, at the very bottom. And now I will start saying a few nonsense, commonsensical things. Because if you don't eat, you die, okay? It's so basic that everybody, regardless your age, your language, your culture, your religion, your education, your habits, everybody needs to eat at least once per day, okay? If not 2 or 3. And then, well, health is at the second level, and education is, I think that it's not written there, but it should be at the third. So in our societies, okay, Western world, with exception of United States, but we have guaranteed access for everybody to 2 needs that are not extremely essential. You cannot live without eating, and I'm sorry to repeat these stupid things, but you can live without being educated. No? Okay. Now, I will come back to this one, but that's the proposal, the political, because I know that, and I've been in other presentations like this, and people, they always think about, that's cool, but how you're going to implement it? Well, that's the proposal that came during the preparatory work of the UN Food System Summit, that at that time I was working with Christine and also with Martin. The Food System Summit in 21, I was working in action track number 5 on resilient food systems, and we put forward, with a lot of people, a coalition, a proto-coalition, because at the end it was not officialized, but a coalition of universal access to universal food access scheme, and indigenous people's food systems, based on the idea that food is not a commodity, that I was really glad the last couple of days to hear that very often. We all agree, or we may all agree, that food is not only a commodity, but if it's not a commodity, things are not defined by what they are not. They are defined by what they are. So if it's not a commodity, what is? And that's why, that was the origin of my PhD. I mean, at the beginning, I wanted to say, I was 15 years working on food security issues, food security and nutrition, and then at a certain point, I had the privilege to stop my professional career, and I went back to university to think, like you are doing here, you know. I was paid for thinking and writing and reflecting, and so I was basically, based on my previous 15 years of experience, I wanted to think about why, whenever I'm going to any country or whenever I'm doing something with previous, before I was working with FAO, with the European Union, with the Red Cross, with Action Against Hunger. So always, whenever we think about how to solve hunger in the world, we think about market-based solutions. Why? Well, because if food is a commodity, the best allocation mechanism is the market. Fine, fair enough. But why food is a commodity? And where is Andrew? Well, Andrew is working in a program, UNDP program, that is now doing very interesting things. But the program is called Food Commodity Program, no? Okay, fine, but anyway, it used to be called Food Commodity Program because it's a very generalized understanding that food is a commodity. I will return to this one, okay, later on. But the idea is that I also defend that if food is not a commodity, or not only a commodity, and is something else, I'm proposing the idea that food should be valued, governed, and considered as a commons, not only commons / public good / human right. Because if we value food differently, and the way we value food is nothing but a social construct, what means that it can be done like this, it can be done the other way, it can be done in this color, it can be done something else. And you will see that throughout history also, different cultures, they have considered food differently. And, well, you will see, I mean, things are, they can be the way we want them to be. Because how do people value food? How do you value food? What is food for you? So if I'm asking this simple question, what does it mean food for you? Tell me 3 words. Probably, well, of course, the 3 words will not be the same for everybody. There will be some commonalities, but also there will be striking differences. Because food has multiple meanings for each individual, but also for each society and in each civilization and different meanings throughout history. Because the way we value food, it's very, very much situated and phenomenological. What means it depends on the eye of the beholder, okay? And depends on who you are and how do you consider, I mean, and that's also, don't take it personally, but I mean, in the south of Europe, we value food differently from the north of Europe. I'm from the south, okay? I'm from Spain. You know, when I had one day, I was presenting with colleagues in Italy, with Tommaso Ferrando, and you know, everybody was saying, of course, I mean, food is, you know, la mamma, food is the friends, conviviality, and you know, you need to eat this cheese that my mother, I mean, for Italians, it's really food is even much more than for Spaniards, okay? For them, it's one of the triads, I mean, yeah. I think that here in Germany, it's not exactly the same. And if you go to Sweden, food is fine, but again, going back to the narrative, okay? Narratives, framings, telling stories, okay? I'm going to tell you, you know that I'm telling you a story that at the end you may be convinced or not, it may resonate with you or not, but it's nothing but story. But this one is also another story. That food is a commodity, okay? And as a commodity, the best allocation mechanism is the market. Right now, neoliberal market. And that's why we need to reduce the cost, maximize the profit, and to make people eat as much as possible. And that's why we have obesity, because people are eating much more calories than actually needed. And those are the features of industrial food system. That it's basically, we have been discussing, there are some people that they say the industrial food system is broken, and I was basically much more defending the idea that Eric Hol-Jimenez said once, and it really resonated with me pretty much, that the industrial food system is not broken. It's actually, I'm sorry that I'm repeating the idea, but it's actually working as it was meant for, as it was planned for. The idea is to maximize the profit, don't think about a true account or true accountability, sustainable development of natural resources, try to maximize profit as much as possible now, because nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow. And actually, in many cases, many countries, we are having what is called now a low-cost food system. Cheapening foods, cheapening system. I mean, making things low wages, low valuation of nature, low price of food. Because if the food price is the lowest possible, I mean, more people will eat more. Not better, I mean, not healthier, more. And the current way that we produce and consume food, especially industrial food system, and remember, I don't like the word global food system, because it would be global food systems, because there are many systems in the world, different, with different values and different moral economies. But the industrial food system, that is basically the one that you go out and you go there to a supermarket. That's what we call industrial food system. You may have good products in the supermarket, healthy products, but the entire system is what we call industrial food system. It's basically the main driver of planetary destruction. Okay? And that's basically official figures, Johan Rockström and the planetary boundaries. Well, the main driver of overshooting planetary boundaries is the industrial food system. Almost half of land use, 70% of water use, 1/3 of total greenhouse gas emissions, and provoking the sixth max extinction. Okay, land clearance, forest. That's an example of Brazil, soybean plantations that are basically encroaching more and more the Amazonian forest. And that the idea of the industrial food system is broken, and we cannot continue eating, consuming, producing, and transforming food in the way that it has been done for the last 50 years, is now more or less a given, including the latest report from WWF. But you have seen since 2016 or 2009, the UNEP report. There are many global reports with a lot of experts that they already agree that we cannot continue producing and eating in the same that we are doing. And to me, that was a hallmark, because in 2020, the group of chief scientific advisors to the European Union, a lot of science and a lot of reports, and they commissioned a report that is sustainable food system with another report, and that was, and at the end, the main recommendation that they made to the European Union, and to me I was really, you cannot imagine how pleased I was reading this. Towards a sustainable food system, moving from food as a commodity towards food as more of a common good. I was delighted, because who is doing that? No, who is saying that? It was not José Luis Vivero, a little-known researcher in Louvain-la-Neuve. It was the group of chief scientific advisors to the European Union, the 27 at that time, 27 member states, the big scientists in the countries that are advising the European Union, the European Commission. They said, as a concluding remark, that the path to a more sustainable food system requires moving from food as a commodity to food as a common good. There was a special scientific advisor's recommendation to the European Commission. What did they do with the advice? What did they do with the report? I have heard nothing? No. Well, they did nothing. Okay. Perhaps they did something with the practical recommendations, but considering that food should be considered more as a common good and not that much as a commodity, it's not a practical thing. So, well, I was really excited to read this, but later on, now in 2025, well, it's something that I can use as a kind of motivational thing. Then some of the authors, like famous people in our domain of food, like Peter Jackson, Marta Guadalupe, that she's a Spanish colleague, Joron Candel from the Netherlands, Anna Davis from Ireland. What else? Well, Eric Matthijs from Belgium. Also, he was a colleague of mine working in Leuven. So they published this in Nature Food. Well, again, also, it's pure consolidated hegemonic science, food as a commodity, human right, or common good. So, going back now to one of the things that I would like to make. I would like to propose a change in the social construct on the way that we value food, okay? Not only for me, because to me it's already a given. Remember that I'm the son of a commoner, okay? So, but also, but I would like to expand the idea with you. Perhaps not today, but perhaps sowing the seed in your minds that perhaps in the future that could be an idea to be considered. And I will tell the story. I'm very much, part of my thesis was about understanding the way that narratives are constructed and why narratives are so important. Narratives are important because they convince people. Ideologies are a politician in front of you telling you that, the right wing and we need to do this, or communism, it's the good thing to do. Ideologies are ideas, people telling stories. And human beings have been telling stories to each other since we left the trees, okay? And we started talking. So, and ideas is the most powerful thing, because later on, the policies will come. And once you have an idea, remember also austerity in Europe. Okay, austerity that now it has already been washed away. But I remember 10 years ago, especially if you were in Greece, I remember austerity Greece. Now nobody talks about austerity. But before it was, wow, the idea. The entire Europe should follow that, and we should basically shrink our budgets. Okay. So the importance about the ideas is this one. They need to be coherent, they need to be commonsensical, but once they are already, let's say, well presented, the ideas define the problems, the causal relationships, propose solutions, and there is a moral valuation behind. But also, to me, there is something else that they do. There are some of the ideas that I'm going to propose that they have never been proposed because they don't match with the dominant idea, the dominant narrative that food is a commodity. And therefore, market-driven solutions are the most relevant solutions. So if it's not market-driven, well, it could be perhaps some policies, yeah, but subsidies, fine. But basically, you know that the subsidies are mostly targeting big corporations, not the small farmers, the smallholder farmers. You have already seen this slide. The idea is that in the world, and that's why also I'm putting a lot of emphasis on the idea of crafting a new narrative, because for many people, many actors in the food system domain, the narratives are very important. You know now that also even Donald Trump is a master of narratives. Okay? You may like him or not, but he's crafting what half of the world is thinking now. And it's really impressive, you know, because Donald, you will later on, to me, Obama was a master of narratives. The way that he was speaking, the way that he was basically positioning ideas that everybody, and his logo, his motto for the elections, you know, yes, we can. It's a wonderful way, it's a wonderful idea. So there are different ideas in the world. There is a clash of narratives with constituencies behind those ideas that they are struggling to position their idea into the food system domain and to basically make their idea hegemonic or at least more relevant than others. So now, the idea that I'm advocating for, and I will not say my idea because the consideration of food as a commons, it has been rooted in indigenous people's food systems since the beginning of times, okay? And there is still millions, billions of people that they value food differently, okay? Not as a commodity. I wouldn't say commons, but differently. Today, in LinkedIn, this afternoon, I got a post from a colleague called Benjamin Davis, a recent report that has been produced by FAO on community-owned lands in Africa. And I've already shared with you, José Luis. 78% of Africa is still governed as a commons. Community-owned land, 78%, official FAO figures. Okay? So it's not a Greenpeace or an activist, it's FAO. 78%, for God's sake. I mean, and I can tell you in Cameroon, you go everywhere, and there are always chiefs that they own land. But they don't own land for themselves. They own land for their community. So what about the idea of considering food as a commons? Well, again, it's an idea, okay? So it's not a given. But I think that the consideration of food as a commodity is also an idea that it needs to be changed. Because if you want to transform the food system into, or transform the food systems into food systems that are fairer to the people and are more sustainable, and we can live and eat well, everybody, every day within planetary boundaries, we need to start changing the consideration of food as a commodity. What does it mean, commodification or a commodity? The commodification occurs when the exchangeability of any good in monetary terms, so a monetary valuation of the value of any given object, becomes the most relevant dimension. And I will go back to the ideas of dimensions later on. So any other dimension that is not or cannot be monetized, put a price, is superseded by the price in the market. What is more valued, oysters or cassava? Why? Because the price is higher. You know that oysters, 100 years ago, they were the food for the poor. In Galicia, we are one of the biggest eaters of seafood in the world, after the Japanese, but some fishes, octopus, clams, and oysters, they were given to the pigs, okay? And they were the food for the poor. Then, suddenly, a lot of things happened, and they became sophisticated and very expensive. The economists, they have already played a very relevant role in defining food as a commodity. Because the economists, and remember the economist is just a profession, okay? But they think in a particular way. And something like 50, 60 years ago, there was a group of economists that, using only two features, excludability and rivalry, and some of you, if you are economists, you are familiar with this approach, they defined what they were called public goods, common pool resources, Elinor Ostrom was working on that, club goods and private goods. And if something is rival and excludable, and rival, it means that if you consume food, it cannot be consumed by anybody else. And rival, it means that you can already prevent the others from consuming the apple that you have in your garden. It's already a private good. But this approach is very reductionist, is very theoretical, and is ontological. It means that they think that the goods are private or public. They are not as, I'm saying food as a commons. I'm not saying food is a commons, because also food can be a commodity. Food can be many things, but if you say is ontological, defines the object. So they were defining objects in an ontological way. What basically, if you agree with that definition, remember is the economists who were crafting this definition. It's not the sociologists, the anthropologists, or the agronomists, okay? So if you think that is a private good, then the best allocation mechanism is the market, because the market works well with commodities and with private goods. Then, the other definition. What does it mean, commons? For those of you that are not very familiar, although I think that in this institute you have been working with commons for these several years, there are several definitions. I will use, I think, that a couple of them. This one is from Michael Sandel, the most famous philosopher in the world, okay, that he's basically lecturing in Harvard to 500 people at the same time. And he has written several books. One of them is What Money Can't Buy. And he's basically also addressing issues on, well, of course, privatization, commodification, and commoning. Commons is a specific resource that is owned and managed in common, shared by and beneficial to all or most members of the community. So it's something that is governed in a common way, a resource that is essential for the communities, and therefore it's governed in a way that enables everybody to get access to that. There is another definition. Michel Bouwens is a Belgian scholar. Is one of the most, let's say, well-known thinkers and theorists about the commons. Commons are goods, okay? Goods that can be material or immaterial, like knowledge. Knowledge is a commons. Wikipedia is a commons. That are jointly developed by a community, what means governed by a community, and shared according to community-defined rules, that is the commoning. There is no commons without commoning for the common good. What does it mean? That this social construct is broken down into 4 elements. The resource, that it can be natural resource or it can be immaterial resource. Community, there is a group that can be in a small village, or it can be a city, or it can be a region, with a purpose. They are governing the resource together according to rules that can be written, rules that can be customary, but rules that should be known by everybody. So this idea of Garrett Harding, that commons are, let's say, everybody's resources, is not exactly true. And then they are doing this, they are organizing the governance and the institutional setting to govern the specific resource for a purpose. And the purpose in many cases, and there are many common cases in the world, is that because the resource that is governed in this way, or the natural area that is governed in this way, is essential for everybody. It serves to a purpose. Indigenous customary food systems and indigenous people food systems, they are full of examples of governing and sharing and trading food as a commons, where the profit maximization of that trade is not the main purpose of the trade. There are a lot of also what is called non-market food systems in the world. There are different allocation mechanisms that are not based on monetized exchange of goods. Mechanisms that are exchanges, gifts, bartering, self-production for self-consumption, very common in Eastern Europe, nature hunting, gathering, gleaning, that is this, for those of you, do you know what does it mean, gleaning?
Going over the field after it's been harvested.
Oh, wonderful. But only one. You know, gleaning, it's something that's coming from the Middle Ages in Europe, that the owner of a land plot, he could not harvest everything, and he was authorizing, and actually there were rules, written rules in England, that they were regulating the gleaning process for the destitute people. But there are still gleaners now in the US, in UK, in the Netherlands. So those are a few other non-market allocation mechanisms. But I would like to emphasize on the 2 at the bottom, right-based or political entitlements. The state can give food to the people, or the state can guarantee that people get access to food because it's a right. As much as the state guarantees you the right to be defended by a lawyer or the right of freedom of speech. Although the right to food is not guaranteed in Europe. So that was my theoretical approach to food as a commons. I had to build my own theory, because at that time when I was doing this research in 2012, 2017, I realized that there was no theory that I could use as a PhD student. And you can imagine I was lost. I wouldn't say I was, every PhD student is lost, but I was lost for 3 years, okay? So I didn't, and my supervisor, that by the way, my supervisor was Olivier de Schutter, special rapporteur on the right to food, very smart guy, and that now he's the special rapporteur on extreme poverty. He let me go. He just guided me, but he told me that, well, find yourself a way out. Yeah? So I had to invent my own theory to substantiate my field cases to later on get a degree. So on the left side was my contribution to science. Okay, so these 6 dimensions of food, and then I will just go to I will explain them with the new version. The new version is now 8, and it's because between my defense in 17 and now, there are 2 authors, Cristina Tirado and Jody Koberinsky, that they have already produced papers enriching the scheme. Enriching the scheme with food as a medicine, and enriching the scheme with food as a sacred good. So the point is that, the idea of the theoretical approach is the following. Food is multidimensional. And there are several dimensions of food that cannot be monetized in cash. I will start by the easiest one. Food is essential for human beings. Using the economic theory, if something is essential for your survival, how much would you pay? As much as you have. Yeah, fine. But the industrial food system doesn't work in this way. The idea is that the lower the price, the better. Food is a sacred good. How much would you pay for a sacred thing? I'll give you one example. Well, of course, if we are both, if you have been working in Asia or in Latin America with the Mayans and the maize, or in Africa or in Asia, you know that many people, many indigenous peoples, many societies, they consider some food items as sacred, okay? But I'll bring back to my society, okay? Spain, we have holy bread, okay? So, do we sell holy bread in the market? Why not? You can imagine how much would it cost holy bread that is blessed by the Pope? So it could be a delicatessen. No? But we don't sell holy bread. Why we don't sell holy bread?
Because it would be sacred.
Because it's sacred. No? And sacred things are not meant to be sold in the market. Fine. Then food is a public good. Food is heavily subsidized. And the governments throughout history, Annona in the Roman Empire, the Incas, the Chinese Empire, they have been using food as a means to appease populations, as a means to gain legitimacy, as a means to buy votes. Okay, so food has a public component, and that's why many countries, most of the countries in the world, they subsidize heavily the food systems. So the food system, the industrial food system, is not a private market. It's extremely regulated, extremely subsidized. And the companies that are working there, they get benefits out of public taxes. Because, remember, at global level, the entire global food systems, they produce enough food to feed 12 billion people. Right now, we waste 1/3 of the total food produced, and still, big food companies, they are getting a hell of a profit out of that. How come? You can imagine producing cars, I was saying yesterday, in a factory, and then, 1/3 of the cars produced, they basically go to, you throw them away, and then you are still profitable. It cannot be possible. So how come the global food system is so profitable for big companies like Nestlé, Unilever, Glencore, and Arcade Midland Daniels, Dreyfus? Because they're heavily subsidized. Like it happens with the Farm Bill in the United States, also for big companies, and it happens with the Common Agricultural Policy in Europe. Egypt, okay, going to the global south, a country that is basically keeping people quiet because wheat flour is heavily subsidized and everybody can get access to bread. So food is a public good. What else? It's a human right, legally speaking, okay? Although I'm saying that it's not a reality in Europe, and it's not a reality in most of the countries in the world, and I've been working many years on right to food, so I know exactly what I'm talking about. And there is a paper, by the way, at the end. I wrote a short paper on the absence of the right to food in the US, the position, the US stance on the right to food, and also the absence of the right to food in the European legal framework. And so far, it was a paper that was done in 2017. 8 years later, the paper can be read as if it was written yesterday. Okay? Nothing has moved in Europe. No, I'm lying. There is now a recent Council of Europe resolution proposing the European Union to start thinking about including the right to food in the European constitutions. But as a human right, also, it's priceless, because human rights are not traded in the market. Okay? Food is a cultural determinant, very important to a lot of societies. Actually, I would say to every society, every civilization, food is one of the founding pillars on what a civilization means. So you cannot sell, I mean, what's the price of your mom's favorite dish? Well, for you it can be 120 euros, but for me, I don't like what your mother cooks. I'm sorry, but I don't pay. So you can see that there are many elements, but there is also a tradable part, a tradable dimension of food. And of course, food is a commodity as well, okay? I mean, don't quote me saying that, well, I'm saying that food is like a communist thing. No, food, it can be traded in the market. It's fine. Actually, it has been traded since the beginning of ancient civilizations, okay? It's fine. But my point is that it cannot only be considered as a commodity. So if we take into consideration all the other dimensions that are not monetized, food is a multidimensional essential good, and essentiality is a key thing, and therefore it cannot be considered only as a commodity, it should be considered more as a commons. Because, again, going back now to one of the underlying theoretical issues, is that food, it cannot only be distributed through market mechanisms because it's essential for everybody. And market mechanisms are monetized. So if you don't have money in a market mechanism to allocate food, I'm sorry, okay? You don't get access to food. Go to the food banks, because you know charities, but charity is not an entitlement, okay? And charity, it means, I'm not going to use that example, but charity, it means that if you have money, if you have money, I give money to the charity and the charity can feed anyone, but if I don't give the money and the charity will not get funds, the person will not be fed. So it's not a right and an entitlement. Fine. And now, I don't know if you are already convinced or not, but at least I would like to continue speaking in the sense that the way you value food, and actually I did a case study that was demonstrating how your political stance vis-a-vis the food systems, in the way that if you are a reformer, if you are a transformer, a counter-hegemonic or alter-hegemonic, the way that you value food determines your policy preferences. If you value food as a commodity, market-driven solutions. Well, the market, the market incentives, subsidy, food value chains, and those type of things. If you value food as a human right or a public good or a commons, it's not only about market-driven solutions. It's about public policies. It's about social protection. It's about universal access to food. In the same way, mirroring the political schemes or the institutional settings that we have put forward in Western world, and also in many global South countries. That we have put forward for many years. So it means that if we value food differently, we'll have unpermitted policies that have been banned so far, policies that you were not entitled or allowed to think about them because they were beyond consideration. Now, I will stop here. You have never interrupted me up to now. Why not? Why not? It's too late. You don't care about what I'm saying. No, but reactions, because now I could start now with the policies, okay? And I can do something. I will just go through the set of policies. No words. It's like this Euronews flash, okay? And you will just be reading. You will see they are quite easy to read. And then we discuss. That's Myanmar. I was working in Myanmar for 2 years with WFP. That's Lake Inle, and that's the traditional fishing way. Okay, so let's go. Well, I will explain this. It's because they are not exactly policies. No, that's because we can discuss about that later on. It's also that's the theoretical approach to the market, to the, let's say, to the food systems. You have states. You have collective actions, people doing things by themselves, and then you have the market. You have for-profit, not-for-profit, formal, informal, public, private. And those are elements that have already emerged or come up in our conversations the last couple of days. So far, in this triangle, this group is relatively small in the industrial food system. But we have seen that, informal markets are very common, very widespread, and very important in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. But in our Western world, it's basically enterprises and a bit of the market, a bit of the state. Different, then we could later on discuss which type of state, that is called partner state, and there's some options, not which type of market, which type of enterprises. You want to, then, I'm going to do, at the end, when we have the conversation, I will go back to this slide and I will leave it like this, okay? Otherwise, Jose Luis will kill me if I stay, that's my work and this one. And this, I would like to end with the last two. This pastureland in Northumberland, UK, according to the studies of the soil and stratigraphy, and the type of vegetation and using archaeological analysis, these authors demonstrated that this pastureland has been managed as a common pastureland for the last 3,000 years. So commons management of natural resources is the most resilient way that human societies have invented to manage resources that are important for the community. So nowadays, it's still managed as a common land. And those are, well, on the right side is the book, but those are the final two sentences, because they have been also very inspirational to me, in the sense that remember that the idea of considering food as a commons is new to the industrial food system, but it has been the normal way of considering food in customary societies or indigenous people's food systems. It has been the case in the Middle Ages in Europe, and it's still the case, and I will end with that. I'm basically coordinating a group of, coordinating a group of researchers in Europe, and we are now uncovering with the data analysis how much land is still governed / owned as a commons in Europe. 11% of Spain, okay? 12%, I think that is 12% of Italy, 40% of Ireland, I think that it's something that's 27% of Croatia, more than 50% of Montenegro, and so on and so forth. Of course, there are countries like Germany, the Netherlands, where there is almost no remnants of common lands. But in total in Europe, we are talking about millions of hectares that are still in Europe, okay? I'm not talking about this 78% of African lands. In Europe, we estimate that between 10 and 15% of the European, the EU territories are still officially, even with laws protecting the commons, governed as commons. So that's a big thing that is always under the radar. And that's it. Thank you.
We have 30 minutes for a conversation with José Luis. José Luis, if you want to join me here.
That looks very much like World Economic Forum, you know. It's
you can stand also,
yeah,
or
no, yes, like this.
Also, questions, comments,
reactions to the policies that I mean, it was presented.
John.
Well,
thank you very much, José Luis. That's really interesting and exciting discussions. On the policy options, the civil servant one caught my attention. But there is always the aspect of whether public is really efficient versus private being more efficient. You know, like that's also a narrative in the food industry.
yeah.
When you go to Colombia, for example, they will tell you a lot of the agribusiness. They're going to tell you land should be given to big industries or to agro-industry because the economies of scales make it more efficient. There are many different arguments that they pull out of the hat. So when you have this policy option there, that's going to create a lot of resistance.
Yes.
What do you answer to that?
Okay, thank you. That's a very good question. It's an interesting one because that's one of the most shocking policy proposals. But then, I will try to elaborate a bit more. This idea that the public is less efficient than the private sector, I mentioned yesterday Marina Mazzucato, is a very famous mainstream economist. She has already written extensively, and much better than me, on debunking that idea, okay? Debunking the myth of the evil state or the non-efficient state. That's not true. I mean, the states, in many cases, are very efficient. Postal services, okay, just to give you an example, okay? In my country, I mean, education and health, we have one of the best. I don't know if you noticed, but when I put on the universal health coverage in the world, Spain is one of the top 10 countries. Most of the other countries are small ones, like Singapore, Hong Kong. I'm saying that it's quite easy to provide good health to Singaporeans. But on the top, it were France and Spain, big countries, with a lot of people in very far places, desert, very distant, small villages, and yet, the universal health system in Spain is very good. So the public is very efficient very often. Then, what's your profession? What did you study?
Biology.
Biology. Are there biologists working for the state?
Yes.
What's your profession? You? Yes. What did you study? Philosophy. Are there philosophers working for the state? Yeah, you work for the state. Well, fine. So I mean, it means that there are public servants that are biologists, that are philosophers, taxi drivers working for the state, nurses working for the state, accountants working for the state, cleaners working for the state, economists with a PhD working for the state. Why it cannot be farmers or fishermen working for the state? Why is the only profession in the world that you cannot become a civil servant when municipalities, states, regions, they have public land and they need to purchase food for schools, for hospitals, for jail, for prison? Why you cannot be a public servant, a farmer, producing food in an efficient way, for the state in public land to supply the state needs. Why not? I mean, I'm sorry, but to me it's commonsensical. I was really surprised to discover myself why farmers cannot be considered as public servants. And I don't know if you noticed, but I've put one example. In France, they're already considering the idea. Small villages, municipalities in small villages, that they have land, in some cases common land or public land, that is not exactly the same, but they are considering offering public vacancies for a farmer to be hired and to be considered a public servant, like the clerk in the town hall, or the accountant, or the secretary of the town hall. All of them are public servants. So it could make sense, no, to have also, not everybody, I mean, not all the farmers, okay, but to have farmers as public servants? Why not?
So actually, this is Advocem. I'm from Poland, and I was born in '85 in Poland, and on this small family farm that was actually destroyed due to transformation in '90s. So I totally buy it. I'm also super Marxist, anarcho-syndicalist person.
I'm not Marxist.
Sorry. But anyway, I love Kropotkin.
Yeah,
however,
I love Kropotkin.
You mentioned that you're building a narrative to try to argue for that kind of position, which I really love. But I also think that we should collectively think about building many different narratives for some kind of intersectional framework of narratives, because people like me will agree, but I can easily imagine many people would, opposed to those ideas because, for example, they are making profit and that kind of things. So I cannot imagine that kind of arguments that were presented here can reach those people who are actually in power to change anything. So do you have any kind of ideas how to do that?
Well, it's a complex question because it has several questions. If you broken down into it, the first thing is that initially, it could be perceived as a radical idea. But remember, when I mentioned already that the chief scientific advisors of the 27 EU member states, they decided that it was an idea worth pursuing, I said, well, that's not radical anymore. It's something that it makes sense. Again, it's just an idea. It's not only my idea. I'm saying that customary food systems, indigenous people food systems, I published an article with this Jody Koberinsky on Native American food systems in Canada, and all of them, they consider that food is not a commodity, food is something else. I mean, that's why she came with this idea of sacred. Food is sacred. When we fish salmon or we kill a reindeer in Ontario, I mean, we pray God and we thank Him that we have just killed Him just for feeding us. I mean, so it's all over the world. You go to Mongolia, you go to Spain, you go to Italy, you go to Poland. I don't remember the figures about common land in Poland, but I mean, I know Poland is part of our network. So then, you mentioned intersectionality, and I fully agree, okay? I mean, Silvia Federici, some of you may know, I mean, she wrote a very nice book, Caliban and the Witch. She was making a link between the commodification of food and the witchcraft hunting and the disempower of women, because women were the main, they were the one that were benefiting from commons, and they were managing the commons. And there was a kind of process between 16th century and 18th century of disempowering women by enclosing the commons and basically disempowering also not only women but their communities to become less self-sufficient, to be poor, and then they went to the cities and they became the almost semi-slave labor force that was basically nurturing they were moving the factories and the industrial food system. So Silvia Federici, Caliban and the Witch, wonderful historical movement linking women disempowerment with the enclosure of the commons. So the commons, they have a strong feminist component. And actually, it's also related to, I did a historical, let's say, systematic literature review of the papers and books that were mentioning food as a commons, or food is a commons, food as a public good in the last 110 years. And one of the first writers about the idea of considering food as a commons were 2 or 3 Italian authors, women, Maria Rosa della Costa, okay? And then Cristina Tornagli. They were Italian women, not by chance, okay? Because, I mean, commons is strongly associated to the power of women to get essential resources for the household. So I fully agree that this idea of decommodifying food, recommodifying food, it should be also accompanied with a feminist movement. And actually, we have already, with Tommaso Ferrando and with Priscilla, with some authors, we have already written a chapter on linking post-colonial approach to food systems with a feminist approach and the idea of recommoning food all together, because they are already aligned.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was fascinating. My name's Susan and I'm a lawyer and I know very little about the subject, but I'm curious about what happened next when some of these ideas you spoke about found its way into policy prescriptions at the EU level, but yet you said, a few years later, nothing has been done. I wonder if you could tell us a bit more about why do you think it failed to manifest in policies? What were the barriers? And if you could change one thing tomorrow, sort of to implement any of those policies, what would it be?
Okay. Again, 2 or 3 questions at the same time. Well, there is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has already arrived. The time for this has not yet arrived. Personally, I mean, I think that will be my contribution to humankind, and if something happens around this idea, I will already be dead. But in the last 10 years, I've seen that a lot of things some things are going on in the right direction, not only the chief scientific advisors. I've already posted in LinkedIn that, a few days ago, I was very pleased to see that some scholars, they have already organized the first course with Jessica in Wageningen, the first course on food as a commons at the university. The first one. Wow. I remember 2012 when I started that, when I was a crazy guy. Now that there are other scholars that are organizing courses about that. Then the International Association of the Study of the Commons, there was no single mention of the idea of food as a commons before. Now they have already organized 2 seminars. There are now people that are not related to me at all that are already writing about this. Not only at this level, but also we are working now with this network of researchers in Europe. We want to produce a short, high-impact article, probably in Science or Nature, with a summary of the quantitative data about territories of commons and how many people are already involved, how much food is produced, and how much land is owned and governed as a commons in Europe, to target the European Union. I had a colleague that did his PhD on the presence of commons in the common agricultural policy. 0 mention of the commons. The commons are, there is a famous German lady that unfortunately she passed away, Silke Helfrich. You have her book in the bookstore with David Bollier, close to Jessica's book, and who else is here? I've seen that there's some people that have books. Silke Helfrich was saying that the commons are everywhere, but nobody sees them. Okay, they're under the radar. You can imagine, I mean, let's say 12% of the European territory, we're talking about millions of hectares, and there is no single mention of the commons in the common agricultural policies and the legal frameworks. So the commons, they don't exist for the European authorities. They dismiss the chief advisor's recommendations. Why? Because the commons, and remember the triangle, the commons are the third way of governing resources. You have the market, you have the state, and you have people doing things by themselves. Community-driven enterprises, food buying groups, alternative food networks, what's the name? Well, another one that is in Italian, Gruppo d'acquisito locale. Yeah. So people, they organize themselves to satisfy their own needs. And it's all over. You know, I was really surprised to see, it's in Spanish, but I wrote a small article about the importance of the commons in Spain. And when I started digging out in internet, well, there's so many. 1/4 of my region, Galicia, 1/4, 25% of the territory is governed as a commons. It's one of the highest percentages in Europe. And everybody knows that. They're called Montes Vecinales de Mano Común. Of course, I knew that because my father was part of one of them. But then I realized that all over Europe, in the States, in the States, you have also big territories, the state, the land of the freedom, and also the proprietary, let's say, individual ownership. In the States, there are huge swaths of territories that are still public land that cannot be privatized. Okay? It's a type of public land that cannot be privatized and belongs to the federal state. All the national parks, reserves, the Indian reserves. 80% of Africa. All the big oceans, the non-territorial waters. So all those places are commons, governed by everybody, in this case by the different member states, for the sake of the common good. When you allocate food based on market-driven mechanisms, it's not for the common good. It's to make profit. What is not bad, eh? I'm not criticizing. Making profit is fine. That's why I'm not that much Marxist. Maybe leftish for sure, but Marxist, perhaps it maybe is that I don't have enough knowledge. But that's my point. My point is that value food in a different way. I don't want you to accept completely what I'm saying, but at least please consider that food is not just a commodity, it's much more. And you ask me about what I would do, only one thing. Enact food as a human right, mandatory human right. There is nothing like this in Europe. And it's very surprising, because Europe is advocating for the right to food for the others. If you are a legal scholar on human rights, you may be familiar with things like justiciability. You can, if food is a mandatory human right, like freedom of speech, or like the right to demonstrate on the streets. Okay, freedom of speech. If you want to say something and you are not permitted, you can go to a judge, and then the judge will defend your right of freedom to freedom of speech. If you are hungry in Germany, you cannot put the government, let's say, you cannot take the government to the jury, because there is not the right to food in Germany. There is not the right to food in Spain. There is no single mention of food as a human right in the 3 most relevant human right instruments at the European level. But Europe is promoting the right to food for others. There is one or two, I think that one for sure in Switzerland, one case that was using the right to food for one illegal immigrant that was basically destituted on the streets. And it's one of the few cases that it has been found in the European juridical landscape using the right to food as the juridical argument. Okay? So I would basically enact food as a mandatory human right at European level. And that's actually what the Council of Europe has recently recommended in a resolution that was issued a few months ago.
2 questions, but just choose one of them. Okay, 2 questions, but just pick one of them. And I follow you in, I would say 96%, something like that. First one, your provocation about making the farmers state employees. And that, I wonder, that's a provocation. So I come from Bloomington, that's where Lynn Ostrom was one of my colleagues. And her model would actually a little cautioning about that. She looked at cases where like 1,000 uneducated farmers would beat the big pharma industries and agriculture concerned companies. But she always had ownership in that. There was always this thing that these farmers knew their soil And that's why they were so good. They were not state employees. Didn't come up in her models a lot. Not as a successful model. She did consider it. So I wonder about that a little bit. First question. Second question, even shorter. I believe indeed the narrative needs to be changed, though I don't know what narrative you propose for the second part of the idea of food as human right. What is the actual narrative there? Because the powerful narrative of food of commodity is a powerful narrative. There's this rewarding nature in it. There's that gives joy. In my
food as a commons, not food as a commodity.
The commodity narrative is powerful. It comes with emotions that we see, even whether we are hungry or rich. Food is something special, and we appreciate and celebrate it. There's an emotion in it, and that has a price. I'm saying that on a psychological level here. Food as commons or as human rights, which I believe in, has a hard time as a narrative, I believe. I'm a scholar of narratives,
Yes.
partly.
Okay. So I may try to respond to both of them quickly. The first thing is that on the Elinor Ostrom, I read, of course, her book and also her articles, and she was very inspirational to my research. The only criticism that I could pose to her work is that she never said that food should be considered as a commons. Never. She mentioned land, she mentioned water, she mentioned knowledge, very important, knowledge as a commons, but never food. To my despair, Polanyi, another inspirational source, he was basically establishing important commons for societies. He never mentioned food either. I don't know why. I mean, unfortunately, Elinor Ostrom has already passed away. So I would really love to be able to exchange with her now at this point. That I have a bit more elaborated ideas. But why not? I don't know. Why you're saying that farmers they could not be? I mean, I don't understand the point. Just because Elinor Ostrom said that they cannot be. I mean, Elinor Ostrom. Let me respond. Elinor Ostrom. No matter how big she is, and I have a deep respect for her, but she was thinking as an economist. It's fine, fair. And remember, I'm a Spanish guy. I've already presented that. I'm speaking on this from this perspective. You are also part of my club, okay? You don't represent indigenous people food systems, ni Filipinos fishermen, or Cameroonian cassava farmers, okay? We belong to the same, more or less, constituency. So the idea that food is not just, that food is a commodity and resonates so well with you, for millions, billions of people in the world, it's not exactly like this. Food is much more, it's something else. And actually, we have seen the last couple of days here that perhaps many people agree that food is not only a commodity. And there are people saying that it's not a commodity at all. I'm milder. I'm saying that, well, it can be a commodity sometimes, but not always, and not being the dominant feature.
I actually agree on that. The question is how you can persuade people in that direction. My point is about the narrative is not that I agree absolutely with you. That's exactly how it should be. But narratives have to do with persuasion in your own world. That's how you define narratives. And the persuasiveness as a storyline that gives that I'm questioning a little bit.
Okay, but
I think that's what I meant.
But that's quite legitimate. I mean, I didn't convince you. Fair enough. I mean, no, but it's fine. You know, it's a no.
But I think that there is, and just to, is like most of us are convinced by that food is
Yeah,
essential,
fine.
no?
Well, food is essential, of course. I mean, that's a.
It was clear. I think it's more than. Do we think that that is going to convince policymakers, or do we think that is going to convince people that are not in the choir that you are preaching right now? And I think that's a good question that a group, a collective, an association, a community of practice, as we might call it, of food as commons, has to address. Do we have the potential to really transform society, what do we have to switch in this narrative to present it as the vision, as the alternative vision
Yes.
for the future of food or the future of society, actually? But we had one more question before the dinner, Temor.
Thank you. My name is Atemere Glover, Afrocapitalism fellow. Great presentation. Thank you very much. When you said that 78% of land in Africa is commonly owned, and I still see that food insecurity is an issue in Africa, and food is still largely seen as commodity. I don't want to use the word is commodity because food means different things to us in Africa. So food as a commodity excludes people with low purchasing power. And I'd like to get your take on that. Why is that so? And secondly, I mean, I live in Nigeria and Cameroon is a neighbor to us. So what's your experience like in Cameroon?
Well, that's a practical question. In Cameroon, as this idea of 80% of the African land that is still community-based or governed as a commons, it's just coming from an FAO report that has been published recently. Then, in the communities that are, let's say, mature and communities that have not been distorted by land grabbing schemes or by violence, nobody goes to bed hungry. Because people, they take care of each other. You know, African hospitality is traditional. Not in every country or in every ethnic groups, but there are many countries and ethnic groups where hospitality is a must. And you know, if you know that your neighbor, they share a lot of things. Now, I mean, I was giving this lecture as a food scholar, okay? Now I will bring my experience with WFP. We are distributing food and cash to people. We have seen very often that we do targeting and we consider that you are highly vulnerable, so you are entitled to get a box of food, or you are entitled to get an X amount of cash, okay, franc CFAs. But you are mildly vulnerable, so you are entitled just to half, and you are not vulnerable. So in the community, we are doing targeting depending on the degree of vulnerability. So I will give a box of food to you. You will share with everybody. You will get the biggest share for you, but I mean, if you know that your neighbor, it was mistargeted and he is really vulnerable, we have seen very often, and that creates another problem, but in any case, we have seen very often that they share within the groups. The problem is that if I give you this food, because you have two malnourished children, and the idea is that you feed them also, you will share, and then your malnourished children will remain malnourished. Okay, so it's but anyway, the key thing is that let's say in healthy communities, if we can say so, I mean, basically people, they take care of each other. Sharing is caring, and sharing, bartering, exchanging, giving loans, in Cameroon is very common. It's called tonting. It's a system of microcredits that is governed by the communities or by small groups within the communities in order to to facilitate that people get access to. So this idea that food is not just a commodity, and what means that people, they trade food in the market. I mean, and again, I'm repeating, stressing, okay? Food can be traded in the market. It's fair, it's fine. But there are other parallel mechanisms in Africa that are very common, but also in Asia and Latin America, to allocate food by different means. And the idea is that we in this case as policymakers or the states, we need to not only privilege the market-driven mechanism, but also we need to subsidize, we need to legalize, we need to empower other allocation mechanisms. And you have seen that there are collective actions, but also you have public means. Public procurement, remember this slide with public procurement is one of the most powerful things. You can already target, for instance, you could be a government saying that I want just to buy organic food, and all my purchase for the prison, for the hospitals, that is very important, and for schools, it will be organic food. Only coming from smallholder farmers. You can imagine that the government of the United States, even right now, that basically they are feeding their prison inmates with public food, they would say, we will only buy food from US farmers, but only smallholder farmers, and only the ones that are organic. organically certified. It would be extremely powerful. You can imagine how many billions of dollars the federal government is investing in doing local purchase?
Sadly, we don't have time, Asha and Andrew, that had their hands up. We have to go to dinner, and I wanted just to thank Jose Luis for a wonderful talk, and we'll continue the conversation after dinner.
Yeah.